Bad Don's not here because we're going to talk about a hymn again. I've kind of been on this hymn kick, diving in as I do this stuff. I started looking at these. Something in a hymn will come to mind as I'm studying this stuff. And this was another one. It's really more appropriate to chapter 1. Let's go ahead and bring that up. Did I bring this up? Maybe I don't remember if I did or not. But you have this sort of the indictment, Paul's indictment of everyone, essentially, where he says they worshipped and served the creature rather than the creator in verse 25 there. Exchange the truth of God for a lie and worship and serve the creature rather than the creator, which is pagan as it can possibly be. That defined pagan ritual and pagan religious practice. The deities were the things you could see or the things you heard about from the past, and they had a million of them. It's barely an exaggeration. And it's a distinguishing feature of our belief system that all worship, that the rightness of the worship of God derives from the fact that he is the creator, and therefore uniquely makes a claim to the worship and service of all of creation, essentially. And sometimes it's presented that way in the Psalms. It's praise him, sun, moon, and stars. It's that kind of worship that the heavenly host is called upon to worship the creator. And if we knew nothing else about him other than the fact that he is the creator, then then that is enough to merit his worship and service, to bow down before him. I think I've said this many times, but Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 is not a coincidence. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And that's the premise of all of biblical theology. And so, as Christians, we are called upon to worship, to serve our Savior as Lord, but all of creation is called upon to bow down before its creator. You don't get out of that because you're not a Christian. That's a call upon every last creature. So there's this song that we sing sometimes. All creatures, there's that word, creatures of our God and King. Lift up your voice and with us sing. So there's the identification of him as King. And then the call, sun, moon, praise him, praise him. It's a reflection of some of those Psalms. Let all things their creator bless. So there's bringing in that idea. So this connection between king and creator. He's the king. He's the creator king. He's the creator redeemer. Before he was redeemer, he was creator. He became redeemer when he was incarnated as a man, was crucified, and was raised again. He became redeemer. But since the beginning, he was creator. And by virtue of being creator, you don't need to be a Christian to sing this song. This song works perfectly well for the non-Christian. So I just really like how this is woven together. This fabric of the creator king is woven together in this hymn that is 500 years old and was written by, interestingly enough, Francis of Assisi, Jesuit priest, at the height of what we call, or what is often called, the Counter-Reformation. The Reformation in response to the Reformation that was launched with Martin Luther's 95 Theses nailed to the door, the University of Wittenberg, whatever it is. Anyway, so that's all interesting to me. Anybody can sing this and ought to. It's not even a peculiarly Christian song. It's just a song for all creatures. It's a call on all creatures to worship their creator.
Well, verses 3 and 4 are written by somebody else.
Oh, they added to it?
Yeah, somebody in 2015.
Oh, really?
Redeemed, washed by his blood.
I
I don't think this is in our hymn. I think we have different.
Yeah, I noticed that there's different versions of it. I'm kind of one who believes to leave well enough alone.
Solid grace.
Yeah, I looked at another one. It was a little different. We'd have to do 5 hours of research to find out exactly the original words. But I'm only interested in these first two. What do you call it? So stanzas? What do you call the group? The verse? Okay. Just a thing. It's a music thing. The first music thing and the second music thing. That's what I'm interested in. That's it. That's good. Verse 1 or verse 2. Yeah. All right. Okay, back to chapter 5. I've never ever had somebody bring me an empty pan.
With good intention.
Doug brought me an empty pan. You might think why would Doug not fill it with something? And the answer is he's inviting me to fill it with whatever's left over in the kitchen over there. So I have to go out and buy a half gallon of milk. Yeah. Okay, chapter 5. We're on about 12. Well, we're just going to go there. Yeah, one point on this reconciliation thing. This is where we ended. I listened to the last week's this morning. We got to 10, basically 11. But this idea of reconciliation and God reconciling humans to himself is we take it, not take it for granted, but it seems natural to us to think about it like that. But imagine that you live in that day where you're not just surrounded by pagan beliefs and pagan practices, but a pagan way of thinking. And the pagan way of thinking is very distant, impersonal with regard to the gods. Their attachment to the gods was almost purely ritualistic. And so the point was to perform the ritual so that the god would do or do not. And the ritual was the point itself. It didn't reflect necessarily a deeper attachment to the god. You just were required to perform the ritual in order to get the god to do this or that. You were kind of manipulating the gods or appeasing the gods or something like that. And so that's unique here. That's what makes this so unique. And it would have been thought that way by the Romans that got this letter. This very idea that a god would reconcile himself to man, to humans, declare peace, have relationship with that interpersonal thing, that's pretty unique. It may be utterly unique, I don't know, but to a pagan mind, you're going to have to overcome a lifetime of thinking about gods, jettison all that, to really absorb what he's talking about here. But this idea of wrath being turned to peace by the unilateral intervention of the God himself, so that he could reconcile his creatures to himself and have them be his own people forever, that in itself is a extraordinary innovation in their world of religion. Very difficult to understand from their perspective. So he's got to overcome, these pagans they join together in these churches and they have to think about this God totally differently. He will not share his glory. He will not share the worship. You don't get to just do anything you want. There is no ritual that he can be appeased with. He was already, in that sense, appeased on the cross by Christ. So the only ritual that was required, if you want to think of it as a ritual, he did himself. We didn't even do that. There are no rituals in that sense. We have baptism and the Lord's table and so forth. We can talk about the meaning of those things, but they don't entice God to go this way or that, or to do this or that. That's not their function. Nor would we ever think of them that way. I don't think. Maybe we may fool ourselves in our own minds, but the language here is, we're very comfortable with it, but they would not have been, at least not at first. This would have been all strikingly different for them. The language that the kind of structure, the conventions, that way that Paul is thinking here, the way he frames the relationship between this God, the only God in our view, and his people, the very idea of his people. I mean, Zeus didn't have a people. I don't think. Hermes didn't have a people. Aphrodite didn't have a people. She was, she was simply the god of. But these people had hundreds of these gods, dozens or hundreds of these gods that never came into their thought process. But here we have a God who acts unilaterally so that he can claim a people for himself, and he's utterly exclusive about it. He won't tolerate sharing your worship or devotion with another God. It's, Psalm 96. All the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens, and he claims everything in it exclusively, uniquely, period, unilaterally. It's non-negotiable.
So they look to appease gods, and we look to obey the one God, rather than appease. Okay?
Yeah, you can't, this God will not be appeased. Yeah, he is to be obeyed. Among other things, he is simply to be obeyed and worshiped. That's right. And loved. That's exact. That last one there is, that would not have been natural to them. The idea that you would love a God. I mean, you might be in awe of him or respect him or, I don't know.
Or even the idea that God will love you.
That God, yeah, that's right. And that's in here too. That God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself. We looked at that last week. Yeah, just behavior by a God that they've never experienced before. They've never heard this sort of thing before. This God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself through his crucifixion and resurrection. All of that is the nullification of the entire pagan way of thinking about deity. Nullified. All of it. Every single bit of it. For Paul, an Orthodox Jew, he inherits the Jewish tradition of this already. That's where he got it from, right? The exclusivity of the worship of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But for these pagans, Ephesus or wherever, yeah, this might have actually made life simpler in a sense, because you go from fretting about appeasing 30 gods or whatever they did to you only have this one to worry about, and he claims he loves you. And you have these other people around you who reinforce that. So
I'm thinking back to before I was saved at 19 years old.
everybody did. It does. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that it can creep into your mind that you're appeasing God by coming to church. Only in your mind.
One guy told me that he hasn't been saved, but he believes in Jesus.
Maybe he has been saved. Can you be saved and not know it? You have to know that you're saved to be saved. These are interesting questions. Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch. I'm just saying. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm not answering the question. I'm just causing trouble today. This is my daily trouble.
When that guy said that to me, I realized it could be.
Yes. You just have to ask him. We had to do this with college students. You had to be very specific, because they all say the same thing. They all said, yeah, I believe in Jesus. But that doesn't mean anything in our culture. If it means something in Saudi Arabia, if somebody in Saudi Arabia says, think about the difference. In Saudi Arabia, you don't cavalierly say, I believe in Jesus, probably even in private. If you say, I believe in Jesus in Saudi Arabia, it's probably a person that believes in Jesus. There's no reward. There's no reward even for being, it's all risk, no reward to say, I believe in Jesus when you're in Saudi Arabia. In the United States, it's the other way around. It's all reward, no risk at this point in history. So everybody says it. When it gets risky, watch the number of people that won't say it anymore. And you'd be surprised at who that is. That's my guess. It sounds arrogant. I don't mean it that way. I'm just,
Saudi Arabia is one.
oh yeah, it is home to Mecca.
Jesus is a prophet.
Yeah, but you know what?
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't, they believe exactly that he was a prophet, but they don't believe in him. You know. Okay, we're way off base and I'm outside of my, world religions are not my strong suit, so we got to stop right there. All right. Anyway, I said all that because I should have just quoted Mu on this issue of pagan religions. The language of reconciliation is seldom used in other religions because the relationship between humans and deity is not a part of pagan theologies. Pagan deities are approached ritualistically, not relationally. You just do the thing that's required. You can hate him. Doesn't make any difference. You just do the thing that's required. So Jesus' death was wrath averting, was the wrath averting work of God himself. He stepped in just in the nick of time when we were weak and helpless and unable. And he did everything necessary. So what ritual are you going to add to that? Don't try. 2 Corinthians 5:18 through 20. This is summarizing last week a little bit. Doesn't work. This is painful for you to watch, isn't it? Slow keyboard. Yeah, we already looked at this last week. So this language of reconciliation is would be alien to the pagan world of the first century. What he calls the gospel, it calls gospel the word of reconciliation. How are they going to understand that? You have to explain that first. The very idea of a God who cares. All right. Chrysostom, whom Mu quotes, he was a 300 in the 300s. He was the Archbishop of Constantinople. I looked into him a little bit. So the fact of his saving us and saving us too when we were in such a plight, weakness, helplessness, and doing it by means of his only begotten Son, Jesus, weaves for us endless crowns to glory in. That's interesting language. There's our boast in him. Okay, now we move on, verse 12. It's the same as before. None of this is hard. It's easy to work too hard on this. He says the same. Basically, he's gonna, I can be too simplistic, but he's gonna say the same thing over and over again. And the point is gonna be made. The point is made in the first couple of verses, 12 and 13. And then he's gonna hammer it home and hammer it again and hammer it again until, you know, you just wonder at it and you almost don't have to ask any more questions about it. Following 6 verses are an encapsulation of the history of redemption. We're gonna have to go back to chapter 3 of Genesis. The beginning, chapter 3. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go back and look real quick because this is theology, lots of theology here. But he uses the history of redemption. He works his way through the history of redemption, interprets the history of redemption, its implications and meaning, to juice out of it the divinely inspired theology that we now believe, so to speak. But it's reflected in what God actually did. The history of redemption being the chronicle of God's great acts to bring about the redemption of his people. And I think I said last week that timeline starts in Genesis chapter 3 with the fall of with Adam's sin. I mark that as day 1 for the history of redemption, give or take. That moment was the moment when when a plan of redemption became necessary, even though the plan was already hatched. That was the moment when the plan became necessary, when Adam sinned. Not when Eve sinned, when Adam sinned. He lays the blame on Adam. culpability on Adam, not on Eve. Okay, 12 and 13, then we'll go back to Genesis 3. Therefore, just as through one man, here's the back and forth between Adam and Jesus. Through one man, sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. And your mind is going, okay, let's get the even so. Just as this is true, and now you're leaning forward, and you're going to be leaning forward for a long time to come because he's never going to get an even so out of this. Because all sinned, then off he goes on some kind of divinely inspired excursus. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam until Moses, even over those who had not sinned in the likeness of the offense of Adam, who is the type of him who was to come. So just as through one man, death spread to all men because all sinned, and death reigned, and therefore death reigned from Adam until Moses, maybe, or something like that. So what's the point? Well, I'll get back to the point of Moses in a minute. So what's he talking about? This one man. Sin entering the world through one man, and death through sin spreading to all men because all sinned. And then he sort of casually mentions Adam. And he expects these Romans to understand fully what we're about to look at in Genesis chapter 3. Never references Genesis chapter 3. He just highlights a few points about it to trigger their memory, and now they're just supposed to know what it is he's talking about in Genesis chapter 3. So let's go there. Okay, so let's remind ourselves, we have Eve and the fruit and the serpent, and then she gives the fruit to Doofus, who just eats it. Yeah, anyone is in his place. Unfortunately for him, he was in his place. I take that back. Adam knew God in a way that I don't. So, and I would have done the same thing. Okay, then the curse comes. So he eats the fruit. He eats the fruit of the tree. And leaving everything else aside, we have now the curse. Genesis chapter 3, verse 14. Cursed are you more than, implying a curse on all of that too. I'm cursing everything. You're going to be cursed even more than all the rest. All cattle and all beasts, on your belly will you, oh, I'm sorry. That's the serpent. Cursed, sorry. My mind was moving ahead of my mouth. So this is the curse on Adam. Cursed is the ground because of you. Wow, that's interesting. He's not only the cause of the curse on the rest of the human race, he's the cause of the curse on all of creation. If you think of the ground as sort of a representative of everything out there. In toil you will eat of it all the days of your life, both thorns and thistles, it shall grow for you. You will eat the plants of the field, by the sweat of your face you will eat bread. There's the curse at the bottom there. There's the climactic part of the curse. Till you return to the ground, from it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust shall you return. So there's death, which he never mentions here, but it's physical death that he's talking about, which has some kind of parallel, some kind of existence or reality in the whole person, not just the body, that we often call, that you'll hear called spiritual death or something like that. The reason I don't like that word is because it doesn't have any specific meaning. That there was a death, there was some kind of effect on the soul that resulted from this curse of Adam to physical death. The whole being is caught up in that in some way. So when Paul talks about death here, he is talking about physical death resulting from sin. We have to take that as physical death. But of course, when we look at the text, it clearly implies some grander sense of death. which also carries over into Paul's understanding of it. Sin, the sin thing enters in and infects the soul, and as a consequence, the soul, in some parallel way, exhibits at its level the physical death that the body. It reflects in some way while living what the physical death reflects when you're dead. So the spiritual, the soulish part of the curse precedes the physical part. At this point, Adam internally in his internal wiring is cursed, which will eventually result in physical death, but which now already has infected him in some way. And so it's going to infect his children. It's genetic, and it's going to infect their children like a contagion, like a viral spread, like COVID, like a spiritual COVID or something that just, and much more infectious, where it just spreads like this through every single person and infects them with this curse before the physical part of the curse, the death, even takes place. It's a contagion. A contagion entered into the human race with the first person, with the first male, Adam. Now I got to go listen to this after this is all over and see if I agree with everything I just said. I think I do. All right, so the curse has come. This is what Paul's talking about. In a couple sentences, he's summarizing right here, he's summarizing in this verse, he's summarizing everything up through to and including Genesis chapter 6 and the great statement in verse 5 that we're going to look at in a second that resulted in the flood. He does it in one single verse. So that's chapter, look how fast it happens. That's chapter 3. He drives the man. Adam or Eve was the cause of this. The man has become like one of us. We're not going to get into the meaning of it. Knowing good and evil, we're not going to talk about all that. Therefore, God sent him out of the garden. And of course, in solidarity, his wife comes with him. So he drove the man out of the garden. So there's your another element of the curse, right? It's everything collapses. Everything falls apart across the whole realm, across the whole spectrum. The whole created order, immediately the contagion spreads to the whole created order. And this pristine world of the garden is not destroyed. He's exiled from it. Nobody can live in it anymore. Then we move on to chapter, I don't want to talk about all that. You know, now the contagion spreads and we have this, one of the descendants, Lamech, expressing the consequences of the curse. He killed a man. Oh, do we miss Abel? Oh, I'm sorry, we missed Cain and Abel. So now Cain and Abel arise. Cain kills Abel. Immediately, that's the next story after the curse. Eve has children, and there's this interfamily thing that happens where one of the brothers kills the other brothers. And he does so apparently without any kind of remorse. So infection spreads. Now it moves beyond that to Lamech, more murder, whatever you want to call that, arrogance or something like that. We'll skip the Enoch part. And then we'll skip all of that and we'll move right on to 6. So then we have the weird story of the sons of God and the daughters of men, which is reflective also of some kind of evil that is heavily debated. But anyway, you know, where the angels, I don't know, doesn't matter for our purposes. The point is that it represents this contagion rippling across the landscape and infecting all of creation. And then the great statement in verse 5, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth. He was grieved in his heart. And it keeps moving little by little, that hammer over there. So how long did that take? We went from chapter 3, verse whatever, 19 or something like that. What is it? chapter 3, yeah, 17, 17 through 19, there's the curse. How long does it take? So we 4 and 5 are in between. 5 is a genealogy. So in terms of narrative, it's a chapter and a little bit before you have this statement as a consequence of Adam's sin. So there's your statement about universal depravity, the universal contagion of sin infecting the entire human race in a matter of, that's work. I better turn off Teams. One of the people I work with works all the time. That was her. Her name is Melinda. It's a hard charger. She works like 12 hours a day. And Sundays, apparently, at 9:54 when she should be in church. Anyway, so that's how long it takes. And there's the contagion having overwhelmed the world to the point where even God is, in some sense, shocked. The earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence. The crowning achievement of sin, violence. And then he keeps using the word, it was corrupt. All flesh had corrupted itself. The earth was filled with violence. I will destroy them with the earth. With the earth. I will destroy them with the earth. So that's the curse that he is taught, and the infection. It's not theology as much as it is just, he just knows his book of Genesis, the first few chapters of the book. And then, of course, you have, however, unilateral act of God in grace after the flood. I will never again curse the ground on account of man, because man can't help it anymore. Man's heart is evil from its youth. It's an acknowledgement at this point in the text that sin has infected the entire human race. There has to be a plan. There has to be a redemptive timeline, a timeline of redemption that comes into play at this point. And that will start happening in chapter 12 with the arrival of Abraham. And so there'll be some things that happen and continue to happen, Babel and so forth. The sin continues to spread. God, having bound himself with this oath, when Babel happens, will he destroy the earth again? No, he won't, because he made a promise in 8:20:21. And so he's going to take a different path. And the next thing after that is Abraham. And then the rest of the Bible continues down a different path, this path of redemption. From Genesis chapter 12 on, it's a timeline of redemption. And that's what he's getting at, I think. Just as through one man sin entered into the world, hasn't used his name yet, and death through sin, verses 17 through 19, chapter 3, so death spread to all men, on all the rest, through chapter 6 and then on and on, because, and then we see it in Genesis chapter 3 as well, all sinned. And then we continue. So it's a fairly straightforward point. It's not complicated. He's going to go back and forth on this all the way through the rest of this chapter, but I just want to point out, this is not terribly difficult to understand if you understand what happened in Genesis. It's not a bullet point on a theological test or, statement of faith. It's just knowing what happened. And what happened was what we just read. Paul's just summarizing it from a divine point of view. So he's going to introduce the idea of death here. How do we know that he means more than physical death? Well, he's going to talk about eternal life later. So there's Adam, we'll get to this, and Jesus Christ. Death comes through Adam. Physical death plus, how much plus? Eternal life comes through Jesus Christ, which reverses the curse, which reverses what it was that God cursed the human race with in Genesis chapter 3. So that's more than physical death, because he's talking about something more than physical life here. He's talking about something we are experiencing now, and something that goes on forever and ever. It's the overcoming of death itself. In this new life of reconciliation that results from God reconciling the world to himself through Christ. So you can see these parallels happening now. There's Adam and there's Christ. There's death and life. I've already moved forward so you can see it. But now you're just going to watch these parallels go between Adam, the one man Adam, and the one man Jesus Christ. And he's going to go back and forth and back and forth. And so Adam then is both a type, just as through Adam this happened, so also through Christ this happened. He also calls him a type right here. Adam is a type of Christ right there. But he's also an antitype. He's the opposite. He's both a type and an antitype. And he's going to go back, and you got to just pay attention to how he weaves that together, which I'll try to point some things out. All right. The opposite of. Yeah. So where sin spreads, death spreads. Right? There it is in verse 12. Like day follows night, or like night follows day would be more accurate. When there's day, you know that night is coming. It's inevitable. Where there's sin, you know that death is coming. It's inevitable. Not only where there's sin, you know that death has already occurred. Death has already occurred in one sense, and it will occur in another sense. It's almost like you're between the two deaths. You were born somehow you were born in death, in a state of some kind of death that we call spiritual death, because of sin that you inherited from Adam. And as a consequence of that, you will die if nobody does anything. Both of those things. You cannot undo the first. You will be born in sin because you will be born in Adam's sin. And so you will die, but something was done which will reverse the curse. And so what you were born in that led to death will be reversed and result in life. And he's saying something about that as he goes back and forth between Adam and Jesus. Since sin is universal, death is universal. If you ask the question, why does every person sin? The answer is because Adam sinned. And we inherit the curse that we stand in solidarity with Adam's sin. And so we stand under the curse that Adam was cursed with. Adam's curse is our curse. So we have here what we often call the doctrine of original sin, what I call inherited sin. If you ask the question, ask it this way, are you a sinner because you sin, or do you sin because you're a sinner? And the answer is yes. Both of those things are true. The philosopher, but because you can lie to yourself, you can think that because you're not sinning, or you don't perceive yourself to be sinning, you are not a sinner. I mean, that's how you can imagine that because you're not lying and you forgot about all your past lies, that you're not a liar. Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher, who has an appropriately terrible reputation among Christians, he's the God is dead philosopher. He said in one of his books, I had a Nietzsche phase in my life, so I read all of his books and then 2 biographies on him. He's a fascinating guy in a really sick way, I guess. But he had this statement. He had a remarkable insight into human nature. And he said, you Christians have it all wrong. You think, I don't remember which example, I'll use adultery. He said, you Christians think that if you commit adultery, you become an adulterer. That's wrong. You mistake cause for effect. You're an adulterer. You commit adultery because you're an adulterer. You had to have it in you in the first place in order to do it. You lie because you're a liar. You're dishonest. You steal because you're a thief. And the thief part preceded the stealing part. Otherwise, you wouldn't have done it. You don't become a liar when you lie. You lie because you're a liar. That's how and he thought the Christians got that backwards. They mistake cause for effect. The easy thing to do. Anyway, that's Adam. So does anybody want to? I kind of ad-libbed a lot of that, so I have to go back and listen to see if I agree with myself. But that's original sin. Essentially, it's right there in Genesis chapters 3, verse 6.
So if someone tells you they're basically good. I'm never going to those two phrases in the. You sin because you're a sinner. If you believe you sin because you're a sinner, you wouldn't be saying you're basically good.
Usually you say you're basically good because you conveniently have amnesia about bad things you've done. And then if you're like my dad, when you're laying there in the hospital for the last few days, that's all you can remember is the bad things you've done. And they start coming back all your life, and you telling yourself you're a good person. But when the end comes, the only thing you don't sit there and remember all the good things you did. You remember all of a sudden they pop back up again. Yeah. That was my dad. He was looking off into space, and my brother asked him, "What are you thinking about?" And he said, a little more colorful language, "All the lousy things that I did to people." He's a pretty good man. He's a pretty good man, but all he could think about was that. It's too bad, but it's, to pick at yourself like that. But usually you pick a very self-flattering definition of the word good when you say that. So they did that a lot when I was on staff with Crusade, the students would say that kind of thing a lot. I follow up. What do you mean by good? And they tend to go for the lowest common denominator. Well, I've never killed anyone. Wow, that's a really high standard of goodness right there. Anything above never killed anybody. Not hard to meet. Have you never killed anybody? Why have you never killed anybody? Because it's not in your nature, or because you just never had the need to. And you didn't want to go to jail anyway. What if you had the need to and there was going to be no cost to it? So that word good, define good. We like definitions. So define good. We should do that more often. Never murdering somebody. I basically ask them, never murder somebody. Every non-murderer has never murdered somebody. There's relatively few people on earth that have never murdered somebody. But let me tell you, there's an awful lot of badness on the earth among people that have never murdered somebody.
Even the people that have murdered somebody, they claim that they're good because they haven't murdered anybody since they.
They've only murdered the one person. Yeah.
As morality and everything.
Yeah.
changes.
Yeah, it reflects the relativism of our day.
So-
I'm in control of what I think is good. I define that. It appeals to the relativism, the radical relativism of our day, the moral relativism, to say things like that. 1,000 years ago, they would have never tolerated that way of approaching morality relativistically.
So I grew up being taught to be good. That was the emphasis in church and in the home. And I was good, but consistent.
You can be relatively good. There's a guy at, we say this about him. I've said this, I think I've said this to his face. I don't know if another friend has, but he's pretty atheistic. But I said, man, you'd make a really good Christian because you wouldn't have to change that much in terms of your behavior. You gotta lose some of the F-bombs, cut it by, 75% or something. Can't say that sort of thing in church, but man, he's just a great guy. It's just this natural, it's one of those anomalies, it's just one of those I think to myself, man, if I had his natural goodness, in air quotes, I'd kind of like to have that, because he's generous to a fault. He doesn't lie to you. He never gossips. He thinks well of people. He's not critical. But it's not like he's trying. He's just naturally like that. He's a family guy, family values kind of guy, all of it. But the religious impulse is not there at all.
Aren't really about money. So when Jesus said, you hold your, when you were, well, he said about, you think something, that's a sin. You're thinking about, you're thinking.
Yeah.
Lesser to that sin. It's because your heart is afraid.
That's right.
That.
Yeah. Yeah.
That-
Yeah, I'm just saying that goodness thing is relative. So what it looks like with him, yeah, if the whole world had his level of goodness, be a lot better off, but that's absolutely true. I totally, yeah. He would probably totally agree with that. Yeah, I mean, he might even deny that he's a good person. But because he's not, but anyway, I don't want to, the point is not him. It's just to say that it's just a relative thing. Another person who doesn't have those, he just doesn't have the impulses that we're talking about for murder or thievery or, something. Other people he has impulses that he probably doesn't talk about. But other people have those impulses.
Not like anybody, you don't know his personal.
No, yeah. Oh, yeah. Or he's never had cause. He's never had cause to act out or something. My main point is the relativistic notion of goodness. What it looks like for this guy, you can imagine when you compare him to somebody else that, oh, he really is a good person, but he's not. No, none of that matters. In the eyes of God, none of that is worth anything whatsoever. You hit it a little while ago. What matters is the hostility, let's just call it indifference at this level, the indifference toward God. That's what depravity consists in. Some measure of hostility reflected in indifference to outright hatred. Maybe the only reason you don't see the hatred is because it's never had to be manifested. If you start pushing, you're going to see more hostility. And in this culture, nobody's going to push, generally speaking. You just walk away from it. But that's where the depravity begins and ends, in a sense, with this hostility or indifference or turning away from God, not in the relative moral goodness or badness of people. That's the mistake. The mistake is to assume that it's a mistake at the very foundation of the argument that the moral goodness of a person matters at all, is even a discussion item, is even a factor in one's disposition, how God handles your disposition, disposes of you, your moral goodness. That's the category mistake. It doesn't matter one way or the other. Why would you think you're going to heaven? Yes. Why? Well, I'm a good person. Why do you think that matters to anything at all? What if you only sin one time in your whole life? I mean, okay, so what? I mean, why would you think that? Where did you get that idea? That funny notion that moral goodness is even relevant in the discussion. That's what we're talking about here. It's not relevant.
Personal. So the emphasis is on your own goodness rather than on the only good person, God. So if there's anything good in this, it's because of God. Anything good in God's sight, it's by His grace.
Yes.
For a Christian to be good, it would be keeping kind of like a growth mindset, like you're always going to try to be a little bit better.
Yeah, I think you have to do that. I mean,
Just to try and keep the word definable a little bit.
so yeah, I mean, it brings up the question. Well, in the Christian sense, it's not so much trying to be morally good as it is being conformed to Christ. And that if that is the goal, if that is the agenda, seems to be his agenda in some other writings, Paul's agenda, to be conformed to the image of Christ. The moral goodness just is a byproduct of that. But Being conformed to the image of Christ means being more aligned with God, and the byproduct is moral goodness. Yeah, for humans, I am assuming good is relative.
Yeah.
Was that? When humans talk about goodness, they're being morally relativistic. Humans talk about being good, they're being morally relativistic. I think a lot of Christians do the same thing. I mean, sometime, and what we've been talking about is a little bit, we even talk about goodness like this. We don't have the standard. We don't have any standard. We have Christ. We have there's your goodness. So that's conformed to the image of Christ. There's your standard of goodness. But you don't think of it in terms of, it's reflected in morality, but it is achieved by being conformed to the image of Christ. And you think of it in those terms, otherwise you're chasing standards, which are mythical.
Why shouldn't I kill him?
Well, that could be, maybe that's it. Some people, human beings have relatively sensitive consciences and not sensitive consciences. They're dull of conscience and they're very acute in conscience. And that affects, you don't get any credit for that, because conscience is emotional pain. You violate your conscience and you feel it. So you don't want that. So you don't do that thing because you're going to feel it in your conscience. And so that is also not, everybody doesn't have the same level of strength of conscience or something like that. It's everything from, I don't know, pick somebody, Nancy Nunham, to a psychopath. It's just, they're just all over the place. But I think that's probably the biggest explanation for why people are relatively good, one compared to another. I'd frankly rather live around a guy like the guy I'm talking about, who has no religious impulse at all, as opposed to the guy that I used to live next to, that I've talked about before, who was, in my mind, psychopath. Neither one of them are religious at all, but I'll take this guy over that guy any day of the week. They have a different conscience. They don't get any credit for it. There's no merit. God gave that. He's the one that put this thing in you that when you do that thing, it's like you poked yourself with a needle. Ouch. Electric shock. They said, "Oh, I'm not going to do that anymore."
He gets you past this is about whether you think you're good enough or whether you think you're not good enough. You recognize the family, the inherited society of man and the power of Christ.
Yes. But we got all back. Oh, it's 10:15. How did this happen? Brief. Yeah, we got nowhere. No, I'm the one that raised the issues and stuff. So I'm not even sure I agree with everything I just said. So I got to go back and listen to it. I'll have a list of recantations next week if I see fit. So anyway. Yeah, we're we'll start at 15. No, I got to talk about the law a little bit, but 15. Yeah. It's the same thing. You just got to decide when you're going to move on, because you can go on about this stuff forever and ever. All right. That's it.